The story of Amy and Tammy Slaton was never supposed to end up in a courtroom. It began like so many reality television tales do, with a promise of hope, transformation, and fame wrapped up in contracts that seemed simple at the time. When TLC first reached out, the sisters believed they were stepping into an opportunity to tell their story, to share their struggles and maybe inspire others walking the same path. What they didn't know was how deeply those contracts would shape their lives, how tightly the network would grip their story, and how little control they would have once the cameras started rolling. At the beginning, the excitement was enough to drown out the warning signs. Amy was full of energy, eager to start a family and lose weight for her health. Tammy was nervous, already struggling with limited mobility and breathing problems. But even she hoped this show might change her life for the better. They were promised care, exposure, and a chance at a new chapter. What they got instead was something far darker, a system where their pain became ratings gold and their most vulnerable moments were edited into entertainment for millions. For years, TLC pushed the narrative of Tammy as the difficult sister, the one who refused to change, the one who lashed out at her family and refused help. Behind the scenes, the reality was different. Tammy had days when she cooperated fully with her doctors, when she quietly fought to breathe through oxygen masks, when she begged not to be filmed as she struggled with infections, hospital visits, and therapy sessions. But the cameras were always there, and producers knew that viewers would tune in more eagerly for a dramatic meltdown than a quiet victory. Her dignity, little by little, was stripped away, all in the name of building suspense for the next episode. Amy's journey was no less complicated. She wanted motherhood more than anything, and for a while, she believed the show might help her reach that dream. The surgery, the weight loss, the diet plans, all of it was magnified by the pressure of being watched by an audience that didn't always root for her. When she finally became pregnant, it was framed as a miracle moment on the series. But what wasn't shown was the exhaustion, the medical risks, and the emotional turmoil that came with being monitored around the clock. Her pregnancies and her eventual divorce were woven into the story arc, leaving her with little privacy and even less say in how her life was portrayed. By the time season 8 rolled around, both sisters had grown weary of the charade. They were older, more tired, and more aware of just how little the contracts favored them. Each episode brought in massive ratings, pulling millions of viewers and advertising dollars for TLC, but the sisters saw almost none of that money. According to insiders, they were making barely enough to cover basic expenses while the network pocketed the real profits. The alleged gap between what TLC earned and what Amy and Tammy received became the core of the resentment building behind the scenes. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about being treated as people rather than products. Amy, juggling single motherhood after her divorce, began to feel the weight of it more than ever. She wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. She had children who depended on her. Filming days became increasingly stressful as she tried to balance her private responsibilities with the demands of reality TV. Tammy, meanwhile, had endured near-death experiences that were turned into cliffhangers for dramatic effect. Every time she went to the hospital, producers allegedly circled like vultures, insisting on getting footage that could be used to keep audiences on edge. To Tammy, it felt less like help and more like exploitation, as though her life-threatening conditions were nothing more than story beats for ratings. The lawsuit didn't come out of nowhere. Rumors had circulated for months that Amy and Tammy were unhappy with TLC and were looking into ways to break free of their contracts. Friends close to the family whispered about unfair pay, manipulative production practices, and promises that were never fulfilled. The sisters had quietly spoken to lawyers, exploring whether they had grounds to sue or at least renegotiate their deals. What they discovered shocked them. Buried in the fine print of their agreements were clauses that gave TLC nearly complete control over their likeness, their story, and even their ability to work with other networks. The numbers reportedly revealed that the sisters had been shorted tens of thousands of dollars compared to industry standards. When news finally broke that legal action was being filed, it sent ripples through the fanbase. Supporters who had long suspected mistreatment felt vindicated. Hashtags began trending. Petitions were launched, and viewers demanded that TLC be held accountable. The idea that Amy and Tammy, who had given so much of themselves on camera, might have been trapped in contracts that robbed them of fair compensation, struck a nerve with audiences. Social media was filled with messages of encouragement, with fans insisting the sisters deserved better. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere was even more tense. TLC executives, according to whispers, were furious. The lawsuit, valued at $50,000, was a small amount compared to the network's massive earnings. but the publicity was what truly worried them. If Amy and Tammy succeeded in painting TLC as exploitative, it could inspire other reality stars to come forward with similar claims. Networks thrive on the silence of their talent, on the hope that no one will question the system. But now, with the Slatons taking a stand, the entire structure seemed at risk of crumbling. For Amy, filing the lawsuit was both terrifying and liberating. She had spent years feeling powerless, her image edited into a caricature, her family moments turned into content. Now she was finally pushing back. Tammy, too, saw it as a chance to reclaim her dignity, to prove that she wasn't just the villain TLC had made her out to be. The sisters, for all their past conflicts and televised fights, were united in this battle. They knew they were up against a giant, but they also knew that telling the truth was the only way forward. The early hearings were kept relatively quiet, but leaks began to surface. Anonymous sources close to the case described testimony that painted TLC in a damning light, producers encouraging drama, contracts designed to minimize pay, and a pattern of exploiting vulnerable stars across multiple shows. Whether or not the lawsuit would succeed, one thing was certain: the story was out there, and people were paying attention. As the first filings made their way into the public record, Amy and Tammy's story transformed once again, this time not into a reality show arc but into a legal drama with real consequences. For the first time in years, they weren't just characters on a screen, they were women demanding to be heard. And as much as TLC tried to contain the damage, the truth had already started to spread, with every headline adding pressure to a network already known for controversy. This was only the beginning. The courtroom battles, the media coverage, the behind-the-scenes leaks, all of it would grow louder in the months ahead. For Amy and Tammy, part 1 of their fight was finally underway, and it was already shaping up to be more explosive than anything ever captured by TLC's cameras. The legal documents were barely a week old when the first court date was scheduled, and already the pressure was building like a storm. Amy and Tammy, once nervous reality TV hopefuls from Kentucky, were now plaintiffs in a case that could potentially expose the inner workings of one of the biggest reality networks on television. The moment the lawsuit became public knowledge, journalists scrambled to get their hands on every filing, every statement, every possible leak that could shed light on what was really going on in the courtroom. Things looked far different than the polished world of TLC. There were no scripted conversations, no producers whispering directions through headsets. It was raw and cold, with judges and lawyers speaking in clipped tones about contracts, clauses, and damages. For Amy, walking into the courthouse felt like walking into another spotlight, except this one didn't come with makeup or it was unforgiving, and every word mattered. She sat beside Tammy, clutching documents their attorney had carefully prepared, and for the first time, they weren't cast members, they were fighters. TLC's defense was swift and aggressive. The network argued that the sisters had signed contracts of their own free will, that they had been compensated according to what was agreed upon, and that their claims were nothing more than a ploy for attention. The network's lawyers tried to frame Amy and Tammy as ungrateful, suggesting they had already benefited enormously from fame, exposure, and opportunities they never would have had without TLC. They pointed to spin-offs, merchandise, and fan followings as proof that the sisters had gained more than enough from their time on television. But what they couldn't erase were the clauses in the contracts that heavily favored the network, or the testimony of witnesses who claimed that producers pushed the sisters to their breaking points for the sake of drama. Tammy, who had spent years being portrayed as difficult and combative, was determined to use the courtroom to show her real self. On the stand, she spoke about the humiliation of having cameras shoved into her face while she gasped for air, the way producers insisted on filming even as she begged them to stop. She described the way her health crises were turned into marketing campaigns, with trailers and ads teasing whether she would survive each season finale. The courtroom was silent as she detailed how powerless she felt, how her life was reduced to a cliffhanger. For once, her words weren't cut or edited for ratings. They landed heavy, unfiltered, and heartbreaking. Amy's testimony was just as powerful. She spoke about her children, about how TLC allegedly pressured her to film even when she was exhausted and recovering from childbirth. She revealed how the cameras invaded her most personal moments, leaving her little privacy as she navigated the collapse of her marriage. She explained how she and Tammy received far less compensation than expected, sometimes amounts so small it was hard to reconcile them with the massive viewership numbers their episodes pulled in. She painted a picture not of luxury, but of struggle, where TLC profited while she juggled bills, diapers, and the crushing weight of public scrutiny. The media seized on every detail. Courtroom sketches were shared online, fan accounts live-tweeted testimony, and news outlets from entertainment blogs to mainstream newspapers covered the case with sensational headlines. Slaton sisters expose TLC. One read, reality TV's darkest secrets revealed, said another. For fans who had followed Amy and Tammy for years, it felt like validation, proof that the sisters' struggles weren't just the result of poor decisions but part of a larger machine that thrived on their pain. On social media, the backlash against TLC grew more intense by the day. Hashtags like #Justice for Amy and Tammy and #TLC exposed trended repeatedly, with thousands of fans demanding the network compensate the sisters fairly. Petitions calling for boycotts gathered tens of thousands of signatures. Influencers and YouTubers who had once made reaction videos to the show now turned their attention to dissecting the lawsuit, analyzing contracts, and exposing patterns of alleged exploitation across TLC's other reality franchises. Suddenly, the lawsuit wasn't just about Amy and Tammy, it was about every star who had ever signed their life away for the promise of fame. Inside the courtroom, TLC's legal team tried to downplay the mounting public outrage. They argued that social media was fickle, that fans would forget in a few weeks, and that the case should be judged solely on the law, not on emotions or trending hashtags. But it was impossible to ignore the shift in the air. The sisters weren't just fighting a network anymore, they were fighting an entire system that viewers were beginning to see for what it really was. The pressure wasn't just on TLC. Within the Slaton family itself, the lawsuit reignited old wounds. Chris, the sisters' brother, had long been a fan favorite, seen as supportive and practical on the show. But now, rumors circulated that he had been offered side deals by producers to distance himself from Amy and Tammy, to keep his image clean while the sisters waged their war. Some claimed he considered siding with the network to protect his own opportunities. Whether or not the rumors were true, they caused tension. Amy felt betrayed, Tammy felt cornered, and the family that once appeared united on screen now faced fractures deeper than any reality show edit could manufacture. The sisters also had to grapple with the emotional toll of revisiting years of trauma in a legal setting. Every testimony, every cross-examination dragged them back through painful memories, moments when they felt stripped of dignity, manipulated, or coerced. For Tammy, reliving her hospital stays was brutal, reopening wounds she had worked so hard to heal. For Amy, discussing her failed marriage in front of strangers left her raw and exposed. But they knew this was the price of truth. To reclaim their story, they had to lay it bare in a forum where nothing could be cut or edited for ratings. TLC, meanwhile, wasn't sitting quietly. Leaks suggested the network was considering counterclaims, accusing the sisters of breaching contracts and damaging the brand's reputation. They threatened to demand repayment for missed filming obligations, a move that only fueled the perception that the network was bullying its stars. Executives scrambled to control the narrative, releasing carefully worded statements about their respect for the Slatons and their commitment to ethical production practices. But the more they spoke, the more hollow it sounded, especially to fans who had seen too many of their favorite reality stars suffer under TLC's watch. The courtroom became the center of a much larger cultural moment. Entertainment reporters compared the case to previous scandals in reality television. From Survivor contestants accusing producers of manipulation to Housewives stars fighting back against unfair contracts. Lawyers debated on talk shows whether Amy and Tammy could realistically win or whether TLC's army of attorneys would ultimately bury them in legal fees. Every angle was dissected, every potential outcome speculated on. Through it all, the sisters held their ground. They appeared at every hearing, sometimes dressed simply, other times more polished, but always determined. They sat side by side, a united front against an empire that once seemed untouchable. Fans who had once doubted Tammy's strength now rallied behind her resilience. Viewers who had judged Amy's choices now admired her courage. For the first time in years, the Slatons weren't reality TV characters, they were real women fighting for justice. As weeks turned into months, the case stretched on. Settlement talks were rumored, but neither side admitted to them publicly. The uncertainty weighed heavily on Amy and Tammy, who knew that even if they won, the fight could drag on for years. But they also understood the stakes. This wasn't just about money. It was about setting a precedent, about proving that stars of reality TV had rights, that their lives couldn't be mined endlessly for profit without accountability. And so, with each court session, each headline, and each surge of fan support, the sisters moved closer to something bigger than themselves. They were no longer just participants in a show about weight loss. They were symbols of a growing movement demanding fairness, respect, and humanity in an industry that too often forgot those things. The courtroom drama was only intensifying, and everyone watching knew one thing. Whatever happened next would change everything, not just for Amy and Tammy, but for the entire world of reality television. As the lawsuit dragged on, something unexpected began to happen. What started as whispers of discontent on fan forums turned into a swelling chorus that TLC could no longer ignore. The sisters had gone from being polarizing reality TV stars to being the face of a much larger issue. For years, fans had laughed, cried, and criticized them in equal measure. But now, people saw them as underdogs, standing up to a corporate giant. The dynamic had shifted, and with it, the entire future of the show and, perhaps the genre was on the line. Behind the scenes, TLC executives were panicking. Their lawyers were confident in their airtight contracts, but contracts could only protect them so far. What no legal team could control was public perception, and it was turning rapidly against them. Discovery, TLC's parent company, worried that if the sisters managed to expose unfair pay and exploitative practices in court, the ripple effect could spread to other reality stars under their umbrella. If Amy and Tammy won, what would stop the cast of 90 Day Fiancé's sister wives? Or even Dr. Pimple Popper from filing similar claims? Networks live and die by their reputations, and for the first time, TLC's carefully crafted brand of family drama meets heartwarming reality was cracking wide open. Sponsors began quietly asking questions. Would their ads run next to a show accused of exploiting its stars? Would viewers boycott products advertised during TLC's programming? The longer the case dragged on, the more dangerous it became, not just financially, but symbolically. For Amy, the pressure was twofold. On one hand, she felt vindicated that fans were supporting her, that her cries about unpaid wages and unfair treatment were finally being heard. On the other hand, she carried the weight of being a mother. Every decision she made now was about her sons, Gage and Glenn. If she lost, would the legal costs eat into her savings? Would TLC retaliate by blacklisting her from future opportunities? The stakes weren't just about contracts. They were about her children's future, her ability to provide, and her determination to show them that standing up for what's right mattered more than playing it safe. Tammy, meanwhile, found herself in a strange position. For years, she had been painted as the villain of the series, the sister who resisted help, lashed out, and spiraled into health crises. But now, the public was seeing her differently. Instead of a caricature edited for ratings, people saw a woman who had endured relentless humiliation at the hands of producers and still managed to survive, transform her health, and stand tall in a courtroom. Tammy began receiving messages from fans who admitted they had judged her harshly in the past, but now saw her strength. She wasn't just fighting TLC, she was rewriting her legacy. TLC, she was rewriting her legacy. The courtroom revelations only added fuel to the fire. Witnesses came forward describing how producers intentionally manipulated storylines, sometimes goading the sisters into conflict, other times staging scenes to exaggerate drama. Emails surfaced suggesting that TLC executives had discussed withholding payments as leverage to force the sisters into filming. Each piece of evidence painted a darker picture of an industry that profited from chaos and suffering. It wasn't just about Amy and Tammy anymore, it was about systemic exploitation. The fan reaction reached fever pitch. Reddit threads exploded with theories about other TLC shows. TikTok users created viral videos dissecting the sisters' testimonies. YouTube commentators uploaded hour-long breakdowns of the case, complete with legal analysis and fan speculation. Viewers who once mocked the sisters' meltdowns were now framing them as evidence of manipulation. The narrative had shifted dramatically. Amy and Tammy weren't the problem, TLC was. The network, desperate to regain control, floated the idea of continuing the show without the sisters, focusing instead on Chris, Amanda, and other family members. But fans weren't having it. Social media comments made it clear. Without Amy and Tammy, there was no show. They were the heart, the drama, the humor, and the pain. Trying to replace them would be like making a spin-off of Keeping Up with the Kardashians without Kim or Khloe. The audience wouldn't buy it. At the same time, whispers began circulating that Netflix, Hulu, or even Amazon might be interested in picking up the sisters if they left TLC. The idea of 1000 Dale B. Sisters, The Untold Truth or the Slaton Story, uncensored on a streaming platform, set fans buzzing. A new network could mean creative freedom, fairer pay, and a chance to tell their story without the heavy hand of manipulative producers. Some even speculated that the lawsuit itself might be part of a larger strategy forcing TLC's hand, while laying the groundwork for a bigger, more lucrative deal elsewhere. The stakes escalated with each passing week. If TLC pushed too hard and lost, the fallout could be catastrophic, not just financially but culturally. They risked being remembered as the network that chewed up and spat out vulnerable people for entertainment. If Amy and Tammy prevailed, they could inspire a wave of reality stars to demand better contracts, fair pay, and more control over their own narratives. It was a battle not just for money but for dignity. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. TLC's lawyers argued that the sisters had breached contracts, costing the network millions in lost ad revenue and production delays. Amy and Tammy's lawyers countered with evidence of unpaid wages, manipulation, and emotional distress. The judge, caught between a media circus and the fine print of contracts, urged both sides to consider settlement talks. But by then, the sisters had tasted the possibility of something bigger. Settling quietly might give them money, but it wouldn't expose the truth. And the truth was what they were fighting for. The possibility of a public trial terrified TLC. If documents were unsealed, if witnesses testified under oath about manipulative practices, the headlines would be devastating. Discovery Plus subscriptions could plummet, advertisers could pull out, and other reality stars might follow the Slatons' lead. What started as a $50,000 dispute could cost the network tens of millions in lost business and irreparable damage to its reputation. For the sisters, the trial was exhausting but strangely liberating. For years, they had lived in a world where producers dictated their every move, where their identities were defined by how TLC chose to edit them. Now, for the first time, they had a platform to speak directly, to show who they really were. No retakes, no manipulation, just their truth. As the final hearings loomed, the courtroom became the center of a cultural showdown. Fans lined up outside, holding signs of support. Reporters camped out, hoping for a glimpse of the sisters. Lawyers on both sides worked around the clock, preparing closing arguments that would either vindicate or condemn. The outcome was uncertain, but one thing was clear. No matter what the judge decided, the sisters had already changed the game. Because the truth is, this was never just about a lawsuit. It was about two women who had been underestimated, mocked, and exploited, finally finding the strength to fight back. It was about pulling back the curtain on an industry that thrived on secrecy. And it was about reminding everyone watching that behind every reality TV character is a real person, with dignity, pain, and a voice that deserves to be heard. When the judge finally announced that a ruling would be made in the coming weeks, the world held its breath. Would TLC crush the sisters under the weight of legal contracts? Or would Amy and Tammy achieve the impossible and bring a powerful network to its knees? No matter the verdict, one thing was undeniable. The story of Amy and Tammy Slaton, once told through carefully edited episodes of a TLC reality show, was now being written in real time, by their own hands, and the final chapter had the potential to change reality television forever.